Hey, it's Courtney Barriger, your host of Environmental Style Now, the A to Z podcast on all that is sustainable fashion. And I'm coming to you live today from Akumal, Mexico. All right, so on this episode of ES Now, I have the pleasure of talking with Dr. Evan Johnson. He's a peak performance coach and a guest speaker at TEDx. Hello, I'm Courtney Barriger, and this is ES Now. My guest today is here to talk about his latest feature in GQ magazine, Dr. Evan Johnson. He's a public speaker on peak performance, a life coach, and his recent feature discusses dressing for the part to trick the brain into becoming the part. Let's jump right in.
So you wrote a fascinating article for GQ magazine, and from what you told me about it, I think everyone can relate to it, men and women. So I'd love if you could just tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I'm really honored and blessed to be able to share my voice and really just express and share this message with the world about these topics that really matter to me. And the GQ magazine, with that article was a lot about how I can connect fashion and dressing like our future self to what's happening to us in terms of our physiology, in terms of neuroscience, the pathophysiology of diseases, and really anything that's happening in our internal environment, when we're playing with different aspects of fashion, specifically dressing like the person we want to become. In the mind, that's a super interesting topic as well, not just in the body and the physiology, because it's basically like an individual is catching a vision for who they want to become. And when that happens, that aspect of themselves may or may not actually be here yet. So the process of reorganization of where they currently are to where they want to go is sometimes pretty uncomfortable, and if it's a huge difference, if people are making massive changes in their fashion, in their style, in their attire, then it's going to take longer periods of time for them to reorganize to become that person. However, with the right intentions and with the right why behind it, incredible things can happen at a physiological level when people start to dress differently. It changes how we think and feel and act, and it's a really beautiful process.
It kind of reminds me of when you go on a first date and
Yeah.
you get in your outfit and you're like giving yourself the prep talk and like, okay, I look good, I feel good, this is the look, this is it, but it's doing that same thing, but for your entire life, like to reset the way that you're gonna go out there and be this new person that you want to be. That's so cool.
Yeah, that's totally right. And in those moments of discomfort or empowerment, really, like what you said, of being like, yes, this is what I'm going to wear and this is why. That's when the subconscious mind is really the most open, and the truest stories about who we are and how we show up in the world really come into play. So it's such a symbol of possibility, just like all forms of medicine are very similar to that, and fashion can be that as well. I'm a huge believer in lifestyle medicine, and this is just another aspect of it.
In men's fashion, or should I say the lack of men's fashion, especially in America. I mean, really, it's all over the world now. It's ubiquitous. You just got a t-shirt and you've got some jeans or some slacks, and that's what you have to work with. Like, maybe you got a nice button up, but there's so much lacking in men's fashion in our age. Even if you were to change your costume, per se. What do you think would be like a power move for a man in particular?
So the question is, what would be a power move for a man who wanted to like really change his life through changing how he dresses?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, this is super cool. I think one of the biggest power moves that a man can possibly do is, like, a lot of times men's fashion, it's not really that comfortable. It's actually not. It's super boxy and like it's yeah, typical, especially fast fashion. A lot of these different things are not actually that comfortable. So, I was a two-sport college athlete, and one thing we always said when I was playing sports was, if you look good and feel good, you play good, right? And so as men and as women, obviously, I think the first step needs to be just wearing what feels great, and instead of wearing what society wants people to wear, what mainstream media wants people to wear, and all these different paradigms that are totally outdated about how men need to dress. It's actually not as sexy as it once was, and there's new ways to dress and new things to explore. And so starting with what feels best will create that coherence in the nervous system, in the brain, in the body, in the spirit, and how they show up in the world. And through that process, I think they will discover, hey, maybe sometimes, like, sometimes I'm like skinny jeans, graphic tee, like connecting with my inner teenager, my inner child, and I'm showing up with that, and it's super fun. Other times I'm like business suit, blazer, nice shoes, everything. If I'm speaking on some nice conference or seminar. And so I would say, for men to just tune in to what feels best, really connecting with the more feminine aspect of themselves and what feels best and what they put on their body and the clothes they wear, and utilize that to take a step forwards and go from there.
Yeah, I super feel you on that one.
Yeah.
Super feel you. So I watched your TED Talk, and so cool, by the way. And you drop this word a lot, and I think my audience may or may not be familiar with it. So epigenetics. Can you explain that in simple terms and complex terms, or whatever terms you feel is best? I'd love to hear more about that.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, and thank you so much for watching the talk. It means a lot. Yeah. Yeah, totally. Epigenetics, it's a super emerging topic. When we talk about these different fields that are exploring the edges of science and medicine and what's possible for the human genome, epigenetics is like right up there. And a lot of times it can get confused with more spiritual concepts. However, there are connections between them, and they're really cool to explore. To break it down in a super simple way, epigenetics is the study of how our thoughts and feelings and actions about how we show up in the world influence who we are at the level of the cell, and how who we are at the level of the cell influences who we are at the level of the self. Now, this is important when we talk about different diseases and different concepts of like, cancer patients, autoimmune disorders, like really anything that can happen inside of the body that people have always thought to be genetic or genetically wrong. Well, epigenetics is showing us that through changes of how we're thinking and feeling and being, through changes in our environment, through changes in the clothes that we wear, we can actually turn off and on different genetic markers and cause our genes to respond in new ways and assign a new meaning to any aspect of ourself, of our consciousness, or especially, disorders, right? So this shows us, the latest science in epigenetics is showing us that we're not a victim of our genes and our ancestry and our lineages, and that we can actually take that power back and really control how we move forwards as a humanity, of course, and as individuals, and the way our genes express.
So obviously it's not like, oh, I really wish that I had green eyes, let me manifest myself some green eyes. it's more like maybe you had a tough childhood or had a tough trauma in your teenage years, and it made you look like you're in your 30s, but you're only 21. And so through epigenetics, it's more like you're sort of healing yourself and retuning all of your cells, waking them back up with your mind power, or does it also involve diet and all of that, or talk to me about it.
Yeah. Yeah, it's both and, right? When we get to these depths and these levels of healing, it's typically there's no separation between any of it. And at the end of the day, it's all about becoming more conscious of one's own needs and wants and desires and how it relates to those traumas as a child, how it relates to those emotions that are stuck in the body and manifesting as different, conditions or health issues. And as these different memories or experiences or traumas, whether that's in terms of modern concepts of psychology, abandonment wounds from inner childhood, like childhood from one's father, one's mother, one's family members, all the way to like car accidents or it can be anything that has to do with these concepts. There's always emotions and stories and aspects of that get stored in the nervous system and in the body and in the genetic tissues and the genetic markers that are inside of us. And so each part of this body that we're given has thought correlations that go along with it, right? So we can say that when people become more conscious of those correlations and how they connect to the body, yeah, we can use really powerful intentions and emotions and really shifting the way those cells are responding and unlocking that DNA and telling the body, hey, I'm not a victim of that past experience, and it's okay. You don't need to respond in these ways anymore. And it's all good. We can actually become healthier. We can actually change our entire life and never look back. And typically with that, especially, when I work with people, there's a lot of lifestyle changes that come with it, dietary changes, changes in movement, and people really start the process of becoming the medicine from the inside out.
Yeah, movement was a big part of your TED Talk, which I just loved so much, because in my journey with medicine and reprogramming, reprogramming myself, dance has been, but I didn't even know that I needed dance so much until I started, and I was like, oh wait, this is it. This is the medicine. I really, really, really love that. On the cellular level, I'm just so curious, because I haven't done very much research on it. Is there evidence? Have they studied where the genome is like putting itself back together in new ways, and what is out there in the ways? Because you've written a whole book about it, so I mean, you would know.
Yeah, totally. There's tons of evidence. There's tons of research out there about epigenetics. There's also plenty of different, research collectives. One that's coming to my mind right now is the Human Genome Project. People like Dr. Joe Dispenza, Stephen Kotler with the Flow Research Collective. Tony Robbins even is really on the forefront of longevity science and decreasing biological age, becoming younger. All these things, it has to do with genetic markers and these different aspects of human physiology and biochemistry. And it's a super interesting field, and there's tons of research, tons of books. Yeah, I've written 3 books about a lot of these concepts, and it share a lot of my personal stories, and I'm just scratching the surface, really. There's so much out there. Yeah.
That's so cool.
Mm-hmm.
How could you use epigenetics to make an impact in the fashion industry? I'm sure you know a little bit about how, just the environmental crisis that it's causing, and the crisis that it's causing with individuals that get stuck in cycles of debt and sweatshops and that sort of thing. So how, money speaks. So how could we use epigenetics to make a difference in that field, in that world?
Yeah, this is a really good question. Yeah. You know, to start exploring the edges of this, like the world is constantly changing, and people are constantly seeking the next best thing. However, there's a lot of power when people align themselves with the true primal nature of existence, the laws of the universe. It's slower, takes more time, but it creates a longer lasting impact. And so this is why sustainability and regeneration and these different concepts are so important. So in that process too, when with epigenetics, we're talking about things that are stored in the body. We're talking about someone's genes, which means, I got my genes from my mother and my father and my family members and my grandmothers and my grandfathers, right? So this stuff has been gifted to me for ages, for generations, for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years. And so when I start to change who I am and wear different clothes and engage with new practices in eco fashion and sustainability and all of these different things, it changes my genetic makeup, right? So therefore, that is healing genetic traumas, things that my grandmothers and grandfathers and all my family members have passed down to me, right? And so this is super powerful because that means as a collective, as a worldwide whole, we're making massive shifts all around the planet when we integrate these new concepts of fashion into society. And as one person starts to wear more sustainable clothing that is really organically sourced, it starts to save the planet, which starts to influence the biochemical makeup of not only who we are, but the food that we're eating and the supply chains and the water and those cycles of the natural elements of Earth, and truly exploring the depths of all of this. This could be a whole book and podcast in itself, it goes so deep, right? And so that is the significance of what happens on the planet, because for generations to come, humans will still be here. And we get to choose right now the reality that we're creating for those future generations. And then in terms of society, and I really want to touch on mental health right now too, because fast fashion and consumerism and all of these different things are constantly like playing at our neural circuitry and the dopamine and serotonin levels in our consciousness. And so it's super important to bring that in, because as we create these more sustainable, long-lasting changes in fashion and in society, we're also creating like a more like nurtured soil, truly, to plant deeper seeds of the future of mental health, in a more sustainable, regenerative way that isn't so focused on seeking the next fast fashion item, or even in, like, I was a two-sport college athlete. Like, there's no way I was wearing eco-friendly basketball shoes in college.
No.
Like, and
No.
like, yeah. So these things are just things that people haven't even heard of yet. I imagine because essentially as a collective, we weren't ready for them. We didn't have the technologies and the awareness for it to actually come to life. And now we do. And it's really cool to see it come into play. And I think we have a really bright future ahead of us.
Yeah. That's something that I wanted to ask you about, as since you are a coach and peak performance with your background as as an athlete, in college and everything, that there's a lot, as you mentioned, of addiction that, with the mental health issues that people try to treat with addictions, such as fast fashion. And I just wonder if there would be a few guidelines that you would give someone if they came to you as a client and that was one of their, probably not their worst. People like, oh, you don't feel good, so you go buy something. That's not so bad. You're not doing heroin. You're not,
Yeah.
you're not out there getting hookers or something ridiculous. Could be much worse. But when it comes to an addiction to fast fashion, what are some tools that you would give one of your clients?
Yeah, this is really powerful. You know, I think first I'd love to talk about like what flow science really is and what peak performance really is. And like again, these fields of study are on the edges of science right now. And everyone knows that feeling of being in flow state, and top high level athletes for sure experience it like a lot of the time, but it's for everybody too, when you're writing, when you're creating, when people are so engaged in a task at hand and not thinking about the outside world, and whatever they're doing feels so freaking good that they really wouldn't have a choice to think about anything else because they're so engaged in the life that they're living, right? And so beyond that is moments of peak performance, and those are the peak states where someone's skills, talents, and gifts are needed at such a level where it aligns with a high level challenge and it brings people to a state of peak performance, right? So if I was to be using like not a lot of my skills or talents or gifts, but the challenge was super high, it just wouldn't align. So it needs to have both sides of it coming into play. Um, and to tie that back into fashion, I think there's an aspect of peak performance that is super scientific and can back some of this information, because when someone's in flow state or peak performance, there's three huge things that are happening. And the first thing that happens is the brainwave states are switching from beta to alpha to theta, right? So theta would be the brainwave states that are very much related to the subconscious mind. And this is when the gateway of the subconscious mind is mostly open, right? And this has a lot to do with what we were talking about earlier as well, fashion and the discomfort of someone dressing like their future self.
Is this the meditative brain wave, or is this a higher frequency?
Yeah, they're the same. Alpha, beta, theta, delta, gamma. Gamma would be like super heightened consciousness. Yeah, very, very heightened awareness. So which is also a part of this, like the end goal is to get to that point. So that's the first thing that happens. The next thing that happens is the autonomic nervous system really comes into alignment. The brain, the heart switch into coherence, and people feel super regulated. People feel super centered. And the last thing that happens is this new phenomena that a lot of research is pointing towards, called transient hypofrontality. And this has a lot to do with the prefrontal cortex and the frontal lobe, which are the aspects of the brain that are connected to the sense of self and identity and the inner critic, the voice that's like wanting us to second guess ourselves and all of these things. So in moments of flow state and peak performance, that actually turns off and people lose their sense of self, essentially transcending who they thought they were, their identity, their sense of self, and becoming someone new, because whatever task at hand or experience they're engaging with needs them to do that, right? So I would say the first thing would be educating people on what it really means to dress sustainably and really explore eco fashion, because once they can start to connect to that and get out of their old identities and patterns of thinking and feeling and being, they can connect to something new and broadcast that new signature in the world, right? And so because they have those foundations and that education, they can step out of that identity and transcend through peak performance, whatever task at hand, and step into a new concept or a new dimension or paradigm of fashion.
Yeah. That's super beautiful. And then you're not even thinking about it anymore. It's not even you're right. It's no longer a part of that prefrontal cortex saying, I need to do this or do this. It just becomes part of your flow state.
Right. Yeah. Because we want people to get to the point where they don't think it's the fashion that's changing their life. They don't think it's the yoga, or it's not the meditation, it's the lifestyle they're living. That's what creates the most sustainable change, just like what's happening in the fashion industry, and a lot of work that you're doing. And so that's what I like to bring things back to, is what's the deepest essence of the change that can possibly happen, and guiding people to that place. And sometimes there's a lot of things that come up, like, different traumas or belief systems, limiting beliefs, subconscious programs that come up when we're making these huge, super deep changes. but that's a part of it too, but until people have that new vision or that new concept to grasp onto, it's really difficult to get them to transcend into this next level of who they are.
God, you're so right. You're
Yeah.
so right about that. Especially in the fashion industry, because there's just so much advertisement telling you all the time that you need more. You are constantly fighting a battle against these advertisers. It's I mean, yeah, it's sort of a war. At a certain point, I stopped looking like at the grocery aisle. On my way out, I just like tunnel vision my way through the magazines. Like I won't look, not looking left, not looking right, just going straight forward. Not going to see it. I don't want to see Kim Kardashian. I don't want to see whatever's going on there. Like, and even though
Yeah.
I'm working in the fashion industry, which is that's just insane to think about.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, that's a beautiful. I love those three concepts that you shared. But that's super cool. Thank you so much.
Mhm.
How did you get started in this journey of peak performance and really, I mean, life coaching and changing people's lives? You're doing some amazing work.
Oh yeah, thank you so much. I appreciate it. Yeah, I think over time, just going through my own path and my own journey and tuning my own instrument of who I am, I got to understand more about how I can show up and serve the world at the highest level. And thinking back on my childhood, thinking back on different moments of my life, there's been some wildly and divinely synchronistic moments of like, wow, how did that even happen? One of the moments is and I'm going to mention this in my new upcoming book called Peak Human. I'm going to tell these stories of my life and how peak performance has showed up for me. And there was a moment in time when I was climbing this mountain, actually, climbing towards this literal peak. And it was a 13.1 mile hike up the mountain. And about halfway through, I ended up losing my stocking cap. And it was like totally snow-capped mountain. There was ice everywhere. I was kicking into the mountain, and it was a super dangerous experience, right? But I was playing on this edge of 100% of my gifts required 100% challenge. So I was in this state of like, this is super intense, and I have to keep going, and there's no going back. I need to make it to this peak, right? So this is like a symbolic story, but also super powerful neurologically, what was happening inside of me. And it turns out, yeah, it got super dangerous. And towards the top of the mountain, I started to be like, wow, what am I doing? This is super intense, really living on these edges and the risk that was involved in climbing this mountain. However, there's something super special that happened where I experienced a massive time dilation. And it's like it was like next level flow state, because it was slightly dangerous and I was moving my body and engaging with nature. And I entered this state of like, I'm going to make it to the top of this mountain, even though I'm kicking into this ice, and it's getting dark and there's thunderstorms at the top of this mountain. And this is like totally ridiculous that I'm doing this right now. But this was like the first mountain that I had ever hiked, and it was an emotional mountain, spiritual mountain, like really all together in one. And I get to the top of the mountain and I was like, that, and my face was bleeding because it was so windy. I was like, my face was bleeding. I didn't have a stocking cap on. However, there was this stillness inside of me of like, what was I even scared of? It was like I was invincible in those moments. So that's one story. And another story is when I was in high school, I was doing everything I possibly could to play college basketball. And I didn't know if I was going to make it. I was working my ass off and I didn't get any offers until my senior season. We were having an incredible year. And this college coach called me and he was like, hey, man, if you make it to the state championship, I'm going to come watch you play. And I knew this was my shot to like perform. And I knew I couldn't hold anything back. Yet I knew that I could only do as much as I possibly could and train and train and train, because when it's game time and the lights would come on, there was no going back. My body was going to get on that floor, whether I was wearing eco-friendly Nikes or not, you know? So like that was just gonna happen. And it was in those moments when I was tested, hey, I have to perform super highly right now in this moment. And this is one of the most important games of my life. And I just surrendered into that. And I ended up having the best game of my career, ended up getting a call after the game. The coach gave me a scholarship to come fly to that school. And I ended up going to that school and attending that school and playing college sports at that school. And it was all because of that peak moment on the biggest stage of my life at the time, that divine things happened. It was like this synchronistic, something was happening inside of me. So this aspect of science, peak performance, flow science, I think it's exploring the great mysteries of life, really. The divine synchronicities that happen when we release control and things click into place and we don't really know how to explain it, but it's just happening so perfectly. And science is attempting to explain what's happening there.
Man, I know that everyone can relate. Everyone, I feel like, has had at least one peak moment where things just click, and yeah, that's incredible. It makes me want more.
Yeah.
What's my next peak performance moment?
Yeah, well, that's cool because now we can hack it. We can hack performance. We can hack flow state, and by doing certain practices, limiting distractions, you know, moving through resistance, taking a look at different subconscious programs, limiting beliefs, really hacking the nervous system, things like nootropics, sleep hacking, biohack, like all of these different things are different opportunities to hack performance, you know? And of course, putting your phone to the side when you're writing or when you're working, that's another great way to do it, right? Because the phone is constantly going to grab our awareness. So there's so many different ways to hack our performance. So if you're saying like, I can't wait to have it again, it's like, it's just a matter of time, you know, you can engage with it at any moment.
What are some common myths about peak performance? That do people ever come to you and say, "Oh no, I don't think it's possible to hack something like that. That's just a coincidence."
Yeah. Yeah. I think some of the myths are that people need substances to
Mm.
hack their performance, or that people need the coffee to actually get work done, you know. And it's not just about work, right? It's about the essence of being fully present and engaged with an aspect of life or an experience that someone's having. But these things in the outside world, these substances, drugs, really anything, it's not necessary. It's not, because the chemical makeup of what's happening is happening on the inside, and therefore it can happen without something from the outside world, you know.
Right. We already have DMT in our bodies. We already have all these things, that, you know what I mean? We're both in Tulum right now. So it's yeah, everywhere I go, it's what I'm hearing, all the different drug experiences that people are having. And that's great. That's great. No judgment. But if you can get there without the drugs, I think it's a more sustainable, dare I say, approach.
Yeah, it totally is. And you know, peak performance and flow state, it's not necessarily synonymous with psychedelic experiences. However, you know, psychedelics, the substances are also super powerful, but doesn't mean that they're putting people into the same state. You know, it's really it's a lot about, sometimes it's the complete opposite. Truly. And that's just, you know, what whoever's experience, whatever experience people are having with it, it's their experience. And this is, again, there's no right or wrong. It's all about exploring lifestyle medicine. I'm a huge believer in becoming the medicine we seek. And that's an everyday decision. And really connecting with the habitual and emotional tendencies that propel us forwards and propel the entire nature of existence, which again is why these concepts of sustainability and regeneration in fashion are so important.
What are things that individuals can do, starting tomorrow to begin their journey on peak performance? And you don't have to give me everything, because I know that people pay you. So just a couple of simple things.
Yeah, there's lots. There's so much. There's so much that people can do. I've helped hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of business owners, CEOs, entrepreneurs, top level athletes, elderly folks, children, like everyone can enter these states of being, these altered states of consciousness, these deep levels of flow state. And what I like to tell people is get super clear on why it even matters in the first place. It's like always the first step. It truly is, because if that's not strong enough, people will enter those states and they'll go back to the old habits and routines and rituals that got them where they are, and they'll enter the same perpetuating cycles of thinking and feeling and being that put them in that place to begin with. So it's super important to have that super strong intentionality and move from that place. And then the second thing I would say is to eliminate distractions, because distractions, it grabs our awareness, grabs our attention, grabs our focus. And in this fast, quick dopamine hit society, that is a huge limiting factor of flow state and peak performance, because people can never really engage deeply in the task at hand. And the third thing I'd say is to practice living at their edges. Because when someone is living at their edges and connecting to far aspects of their reality, the brain and the internal creative process increases, because the brain needs to make more long-ended connections to different aspects of their life. So that is one way to really catalyze creativity and performance, because it's not so comfortable and having anything to do with the same routines, or they're increasing their adaptability and the dynamic nature of what the brain is designed to do, which is make sense of things, right? By living at the edges. And of course, people can slackline across a cliff. That'll do it for you for sure. But there's other ways to do it. Living at the edges is not always a physical thing that has to cause danger or harm. It can be something else that has to do with work or relationships and sexuality, or a family, or adventure and hiking. It can be anything like that.
Wow, that's
Yeah.
just amazing.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to take notes. It looks like I'm coming to the end of our time here. Where can we connect with you online, and how can people get your book?
Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah. So right now, I've been off social media for about 3.5 years. And this is, again, a part of this entire, path of life that I'm embarking on to really understand flow science and peak performance and what's happening inside of me and my consciousness. So that's something I'm super passionate about. So right now, people can find me on my YouTube channel. And you can watch my TEDx talk on my YouTube channel as well. It's just released on January 1st. It's called How to Become the Medicine. You can check that out. It's about 15 minutes. If you want to dance, check it out. Other than that, yeah, you can go to my website. It's just drevanjohnson.com. I have some freebies on there, a free peak performance habit tracker people can sign up for and download.
Okay, well, it looks like we got disconnected right there at the end, but it's pretty straightforward. You can find Dr. Evan Johnson at his website, www.drevanjohnson.com, and that is DREVANJOHNSON.com. I just want to say thank you so much to Dr. Evan for coming on the show and talking about his latest feature. It was really cool to get his perspective on why what we wear matters. So go ahead and check out his website and check out his TED Talk. It's all super fascinating. And that's a wrap.
Hello, this is Walter from Arizona. ES Now is a Holding Corp production. It is written and directed by Courtney Barriger, with music by Perker Ainsworth, and a special thank you to Alexandra Shark.